Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new lecture for international reporting. Today we turn our attention to Russia. It's a huge country, and it is almost all part of Asia, but we kind of treat it separately because of its role in international affairs. It stretches over 9 time zones, largest country in the world. Capital is Moscow here. Its previous capital, St. Petersburg, is here. And on the border, you see some of the former Soviet socialist republics, part of the U.S.S.R., and also some countries that were under Soviet rule. So around here, you have Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus was under the control of the Soviet Union, but also there were also states, Kazakhstan, and the other stands which are over down here. In terms of the countries that were formerly part of the Soviet bloc, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, which were one country, Hungary, Romania was somewhat independent, but not so much. Former Yugoslavia here, and directly under the control of most of the Soviet Union, the stands here, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia. These are all part of the U.S.S.R. Peter the Great was one of the great rulers of Russia. He reigned from 1682 to 1725. He was what is known as the Russian Tsar. Tsar means king. He had enough of Russia being a conservative Eastern realm, and he decided to make it more of a European power. So after winning wars in Turkey and Sweden, Peter the Great annexed lands neighboring the two seas, the Azov and the Baltic Sea. Then he founded St. Petersburg, a European-inspired city that was meant to be a capital of the future Russian Empire. Absolutely beautiful city, one of my favorite cities in the world. The Hermitage Museum is an exquisite museum. It's also just a beautiful city. Peter's reforms after that meant basically gradually dismantling the old Muscovite tsardom, centered on Moscow, more towards the center part of the country, western center that is, and the creation of a new state, the Russian Empire. He introduced a new legal system, the table of ranks, which provided a chance for talented commoners to make it into the nobility. Eventually, his claim of imperial status was recognized by foreign powers, and Russia officially became an empire in 1721. The Russian Empire, founded by him, was one of the world's superpowers until the 20th century. Catherine the Great ruled shortly thereafter. She was the Empress of Russia from 1762 until 1796. She's known in history as Catherine the Great, modeled after Peter the Great, though she didn't like the title during her lifetime. She was born in Germany. She converted to the Russian Orthodox Church and was married to the heir to the Russian throne, the Grand Duke Peter of Holstein, the grandson of Peter the Great. Though Catherine the Great had the support of Peter's mother, she disliked her husband and helped engineer his removal from the throne. Catherine the Great took power as Tsarina or Queen, calling herself Catherine II. Soon after, she may have been behind Peter's death, her husband. During her reign, Catherine the Great expanded Russia's borders to the Black Sea and into Central Europe. She promoted westernization and modernization through, even though her autocratic rule over Russia actually increased the control of landed gentry over the serfs, so she was no democrat. Catherine the Great promoted education and the Enlightenment among the elite, and she kept up a correspondence with many figures of the Enlightenment in Europe. The revolution, one of the most important events in 20th century, the Russian Revolution, overthrowing the monarchy. Lenin presides over a secret meeting in 1917 of the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party. He persuades a majority of those comrades who were present to vote for his own policy. They decide in favor of an armed insurrection without specifying any intended date. Leon Trotsky, another powerful character who later was killed by Lenin, he set up a military revolutionary committee, ostensibly representing the entire Soviet and supposedly a defensive organization against both the Germans. Remember, this was during World War I. The Soviet leaders were well aware of the Bolsheviks' barely kept secret. They postponed a key meeting for 5 days to give themselves time to rally their opposing forces, but the delay also gave the Bolsheviks valuable extra time to prepare their coup. The Bolsheviks win the race by a matter of hours, greatly helped by a decision to send the Petrograd garrison to the front in World War I. This order provokes a mutiny. The soldiers transfer their allegiance, which by October 21st has control of the garrison. So Soviet government tries to counteract the growing rebellion, doesn't work, soldiers rebel, and ultimately the Bolsheviks took control in the Winter Palace, which is in St. Petersburg. Lenin was born Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov in 1870. He later adopted the last name Lenin in 1901 while doing underground party work. His family was well educated, and as the third of 6 children, he was close to his parents and siblings. His older brother Alexander was a university student. He was arrested and executed in 1887 for being a part of the group planning to assassinate Emperor Alexander III. In late 1917, Lenin led what became known as the October Revolution, but it was essentially a coup d'etat. 3 years of civil war followed, so the communists didn't immediately secure power. The Lenin-led Soviet government faced incredible odds. The anti-Soviet forces, or the Whites, held mainly by former Tsarist generals and admirals, fought desperately to overthrow Lenin's Red regime, but they were unsuccessful. Despite all of the opposition, Lenin came out victorious. But the kind of country he hoped to lead never came to fruition. His defeat of an opposition that wished to keep Russia tethered to Europe's capitalist system ushered in an era of international retreat for the communist government. Russia, as he saw it, would be void of class conflict in the international wars it fostered. But the Russia he presided over had just endured a bloody civil war that he helped start. Famine and poverty shaped much of society, and in 1921 Lenin faced the same kind of peasant uprising he'd ridden to power. There were widespread strikes in cities and in rural sections of the country, threatening the stability of Lenin's government. To ease the tension, Lenin introduced the new economic policy which allowed workers to sell their grain on the open market. Lenin suffered a stroke in May 1922 and then a second one in December of that year. With his health in obvious decline, Lenin turned to his thoughts on how the newly formed U.S.S.R. would be governed after he was gone. Increasingly, he saw a party and a government that had strayed far from its revolutionary goals. He issued what came to be known as his testament, in which a regretful Lenin expressed remorse over the dictatorial power that dominated Soviet government. He was particularly disappointed with Josef Stalin, the general secretary of the Communist Party, who had begun to amass great power. But before Lenin could get someone other than Stalin to take over, he suffered another stroke, and in 1924 he died from his final stroke. Stalin was born in 1879 and died in 1953. He turned the Soviet Union from a backward country into a world superpower at an unimaginable human cost. He was born into a dysfunctional family in Georgia, the state of Georgia, in southern, now a country, but in the southern part of the U.S.S.R. He was permanently scarred from a childhood bout with smallpox and had a deformed arm. He always felt that he had been treated unfairly by life. He was sent by his mother to the seminary in Tbilisi, in Georgia, to study to become a priest. The young Stalin never completed his education and was instead soon completely drawn into the city's active revolutionary circles. Neither an intellectual or an orator like Lenin, Stalin specialized in the humdrum nuts and bolts of revolutionary activity. He distributed illegal literature, robbed trains, while the more intellectuals went on about their business. Although Lenin found Stalin's boorishness offensive at times, he valued his loyalty and appointed him after the revolution to various low-priority leadership positions in the new Soviet government. In 1992, Stalin was appointed as General Secretary of the Communist Party's Central Committee. He understood that if he could control the personnel, you could control the organization. And by the time that the party's intellectual core realized what was happening, it was too late. Stalin had, for the most part, had put people in place, and Lenin couldn't battle him from his sickbed. The General Secretary of the party became the de facto leader of the country right up until Mikhail Gorbachev in the 1980s and 1990s. After Lenin's death in 1924, Stalin methodically went about destroying all the old leaders of the party. He used terror and spectacular show trials in the 1930s and purged the Communist Party of all of his enemies, so that he was able to wrest control. And he also engaged in just terribly bad economic policies, so that it's generally thought that he was responsible for the deaths of 100 million people, primarily from famine, show trials, secret police, and sending people into what was known as the Gulag, or the prison camps of Siberia. In 1939, Stalin signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler in which they agreed to divide up Poland and then leave each other alone during World War II. Hitler ignored that in 1941 and brought Russia, the U.S.S.R., the Soviet Union, into the Allied powers with the United States, France, and Britain. During the conferences, Stalin proved a worthy negotiator with Roosevelt and Churchill, and managed to arrange for the countries in Eastern Europe, which had basically been liberated by the Red Army, to remain in the Soviet sphere of influence. Stalin remained a hero to his people until Khrushchev's secret speech to a party Congress in 1956, after Stalin's death, in which Stalin's excesses, at least as far as power grabbing in the party itself, were denounced. Current leader of Russia is Vladimir Putin. He was born in 1952 in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, was St. Petersburg, then Leningrad, and then back to St. Petersburg. He joined the KGB, the secret police, in 1975, and he was sent to East Germany 10 years to recruit non-Russians to provide information about what was going on in the West. He supported Gorbachev's policies. Gorbachev tried to bring about détente with the United States. Ultimately, there was a coup which almost overthrew Gorbachev, but as a result, he was greatly weakened, and ultimately the Soviet Union was broken up. Putin left the KGB and became deputy mayor of Leningrad in 1994. He joined Boris Yeltsin's inner circle in 1997 and became secretary of the Security Council. Yeltsin had followed Gorbachev as leader of the Soviet Union, but then with the fall of the Soviet Union, Yeltsin became president of Russia. In 1999, Putin was appointed prime minister. He served as president from 2000 to 2008, and then prime minister, and then he was elected as president again in 2012, despite claims that he supports what are known as oligarchies, or powerful economic entities run by a small number of people. He ignores corruption and has denied political rights throughout all of this. He's been in power a long time, and for all intents and purposes, doesn't intend to step down anytime soon. Some facts about Russia. The population is 140 plus million people, which ranks ninth. It's the largest country geographically. In the economy, Russia has undergone a number of changes since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it is more market-based, but there's a great deal of poverty that exists. Excuse me. There were economic reforms in the 1990s that made things better for a while. In 2011, Russia became the world's leading oil producer, surpassing Saudi Arabia. It also produces a lot of natural gas and also coal. So it has a lot of energy to sell and to use. And it also is the third large exporter of both steel and primary aluminum. So it has an industrial base. The economy has done well, but essentially what has happened is, for a while there was a growing middle class, a growth of disposable incomes, but the oligarchies, which controlled the main industries, communications, oil and energy, have gradually been changing the country into, again, the wealthy, smaller middle class and the poor. So it hasn't, while the growth rate has been large, it hasn't filtered down as much as it did immediately after the fall of the Soviet Union. The economy involves widespread corruption and what is known as the oligarchies, or what the U.S. would call trusts, trusts in the old sense of the oil trust, the railroad trust, etc., etc. Now here is a link that you might want to check out, which is the beauty of the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. I've visited it half a dozen times. It's just phenomenal. So that's it for now. That's what we know about Russia, and we'll see you online. Goodbye now.